there should be an oil fund, that it should be treated largely, if not entirely, as investment rather than just put into current spending. You would think that's basically a good idea, wouldn't you?
Oh, you're absolutely right. I mean, one way of thinking about it is that oil is an asset below the ground. And what you do is you take that asset below the ground and you spend it. You're poor. It's like spending any other asset. You're living off your wealth, and if you live off your wealth, it's not sustainable.
Hello, it's Robert Somany. Welcome to International, a series of videos at the National newspaper online, looking at a whole series of geopolitical events and issues and how they relate to Scotland. This week, we're going to be looking at the issue of sovereign wealth funds. This is in the light of news this week that 2 new oil fields have been discovered in the North Sea. Curious and curiouser. Funny how whenever there's a constitutional debate and the prospect of Scottish independence is on the table, there is no oil to be found, but hallelujah, hallelujah, it appears now with no constitutional question on the table, there is indeed plenty of the black stuff.
Where'd y'all put the guns?
Well, why is this relevant? Well, we're going to look at 3 examples this week of nations that have set up sovereign wealth funds or national pension funds, as a contrast to the way the UK has used Scotland's resources to build up wealth for the prosperity of its people. This is about economics, it's about economic credibility, but it's also about democratic will. Many people like to mock the SNP's initial slogan of "It's Scotland's oil," but this really is going to the heart of how to run a nation and run it responsibly and be receptive to the views of citizens that happen to live in that country. Now, as of September 2017, sovereign wealth funds around the world have amassed 7.4 trillion in assets under management, according to the Sovereign Wealth Fund Institute, up from $3.4 trillion almost a decade ago. Funds invest in a range of financial services, assets from stocks and bonds to real estate and precious metals, but all have an objective to maximise the long-term return on their investments. Total assets held by SWFs around the world, 4.2 trillion worth, was held in oil and gas-related funds. The most prominent examples of these belong to oil-rich countries such as Norway, Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, whose wealth had been amassed through energy exports. Now, these types of funds are designed to act as a buffer against oil volatility, which is interesting given that the main argument against Scottish independence is the idea that the price of oil would be so volatile you couldn't possibly have an economy like Scotland's become independent and untethered from the UK. It's ironic and in many ways a hypocritical argument for unionists to make, seen as the very kind of sovereign wealth fund that the British state could have set up would have guarded Scotland and the rest of the UK against such volatility. Now, there are also non-commodity based SWFs, however, which currently hold a total of about £3.2 trillion worth of assets. Now, China's SWF is a good example. It's a non-commodity based fund with about $813.8 billion worth of assets amassed since 2007. A clear example of how a country doesn't necessarily have to base its SWF solely off oil and gas. It's also possible to diversify. Take, for example, the United Arab Emirates. The United Arab Emirates, as late as June 2015, has been using its sovereign wealth fund to diversify. Made rich from oil and gas exports, it's now reinvesting that money in green technology, helping to power the green revolutions of other countries in the Gulf, as well as North Africa. It invested heavily in Morocco's scheme for a giant solar power plant. These are examples for Scotland to follow, and challenges to the British narrative that Scotland can only rely on oil and gas. There is another way to invest and grow your portfolio with regards to sovereign wealth funds.
Now let's quickly go through the 3 different kinds of wealth funds that we'll be talking about today. Starting off, we have our favourite, Norway, with its government pension fund as well as its sovereign wealth fund. It's a fund made up of 2 separate Norwegian investment funds with different mandates. the Government Pension Fund Global and the Government Pension Fund Norway. The Government Pension Fund Global is a sovereign wealth fund derived mainly from Norway's oil wealth. The Government Pension Fund Norway was previously associated with Norway's social security system, but now operates as a sovereign wealth fund that invests strictly in Norwegian firms. The Global Fund is managed by Norges Bank Investment Management, a part of the Norwegian Central Bank. It's one of the largest sovereign wealth funds in the world, with approximately $443 billion in assets under management as of 2009 to 2012. Now, the Global Fund invests in a wide array of asset classes and both domestically and internationally invests in infrastructure projects. Now, since 2004, the Global Fund's investments have been restricted by an ethical council that has the power to exclude firms that are involved in objectionable activities. The Global Pension Fund Norway is a much smaller fund and it's limited to investing in domestic firms. Despite its smaller size, its limited investment mandate has led to the Norway Fund being a large shareholder in many publicly traded Norwegian firms. Yeah, Norway's Government Pension Fund Global and the whole sovereign wealth fund actually peaked at around about 1 trillion. Huge fanfare and media attention, quite rightly. Next is Abu Dhabi. Now, we've heard how the United Arab Emirates likes to use its now oil-funded sovereign wealth fund to reinvest in renewable energies, literally saving for a rainy day. The Abu Dhabi Investment Authority Fund, established in 1976, is very much going in the same direction. It currently manages assets worth $792 billion. It's the largest SWF in the Middle East. Its main source of funding comes from oil exports. Of course, it is using that wealth to convert the country more and more to renewable, especially solar power. However, the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority also holds stakes in a number of other projects, including a 50% stake worth about $2.4 billion in 3 Hong Kong hotels. Earlier this month, the group invested $150 million in Indian renewable energy firm Greenko, which is going to have a huge future with regards to China's new Silk Route, with developments as far-reaching as Beijing all the way to Iran and Afghanistan. Similar to its Gulf neighbour, Saudi Arabia, it has a stake in the London's development of its Gatwick Airport and Norway's gas company Gassled. The fund has extended its investments across 24 asset classes and has a 7.4% annualised rate of return in the last 20 years. Finally, we have Hong Kong State Administration of Foreign Exchange Investment Company and the Hong Kong Monetary Authority Investment Portfolio. The Safe Investment Company, established in 1997, is the Hong Kong subsidiary of China's Administration of Foreign Exchange, with the main purpose of managing China's foreign currency reserves. The fund is known for its investments in foreign-listed companies. These include European companies, ARM Holdings, Telecom Italia, and Fiat Chrysler. The group also holds stakes in banks in Australia and New Zealand. Now, Safe Investments Companies currently has around $474 billion under its management. Now, the Monetary Authority Investment Portfolio wing is managed by the City-States Monetary Authority, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority. That's used to support the Hong Kong dollar and manages about $442.4 billion worth of assets. It was created in 1993 to manage the Exchange Fund, following the merger of the Office of the Exchange Fund and the Office of the Commissioner of Banking. Now, the Exchange Fund's primary objective is to affect either directly or indirectly the exchange value of the currency of Hong Kong and to stabilise its financial services. But increasingly, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority investment portfolio has been used to support all kinds of infrastructure projects, from mainland China to Singapore, Japan, Korea, and also in India. These 3 examples of sovereign fund are clear cases where countries which haven't necessarily even had the windfall in terms of resources that the UK has had have prudently been able to set aside resources for the benefit of their people. Some of them do not belong to democratic states. Many of them have struggled in terms of democratic development. Norway, before its oil fund kicked in, was in a far poorer position than the UK, even during its six-man of Europe days. It's a clear case for the argument against UK management, but also it dismisses claims that Scotland can't have an oil fund because the oil is running out. If we look at United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Abu Dhabi, we have countries in the Middle East, oil-rich, that are now taking that wealth and reinvesting it into renewable energies. The argument against Scotland being able to do the same is simply another in a long line of excuses to suggest as if Scotland cannot manage its own affairs, and that the UK and the UK government are inherently superior when it comes to matters of growth as well as sustainable development. Thank you for listening.